When I first got to college, I was incredibly excited that I would finally be able to make my own schedule. I thought this is the perfect time for me to finally work on all the goals I hope to accomplish, to get into the habits that I want to develop, and to have the flexibility to create a schedule that balances work and recreation perfectly. And every semester, I would sit down at the beginning and I would set out all my goals and projects, all my markers and milestones, and I would write a perfect, beautiful color coded schedule. I'd paste it on my wall. And from there, the same thing would happen every single time. Around week 3 or 4, the certain things would start falling to the wayside, and the plan would fall apart. So, in this episode on Learning at Leisure, I'm going to talk about some of the most common reasons why plans fail and how to fix them. And from there, how you can then optimize your time and resources to dedicate only as much as needed and deserved for each task that you hope to work for to accomplish more in less time. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Alex Mika, and I'm a third-year PhD student studying English literature. As a student and as a teacher, I'm really invested in finding the best time management strategies and tips and sharing them with you for your own personal, academic, and professional growth. The ways in which I make plans and schedules has shifted dramatically ever since I came across this quote. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. This is from James Clear's Atomic Habits, which, in my opinion, is one of the best books on motivation and discipline, especially when you're trying to develop incremental growth over time, especially for very long periods of time. It's great at building strategies for working towards larger goals, but even small ones as well. But I think this quote is especially pertinent to our topic today because it addresses one of the most common fundamental problems that we encounter when we make our plans. And that is that they can be too goal oriented and insufficiently capability oriented. A lot of times, I personally know this to be true when I make a schedule. I tend to bite off more than I can chew. My excitement at the beginning for starting a new project leads me to create a plan that I think I'll be able to finish much more quickly than I actually will be. And I don't take into account all of the energy level fluctuations that I'm going to have or any kinds of roadblocks that I might encounter along the way. I don't consider these things in the beginning, or at least I didn't used to. I've been trying to get better about this, but a lot of times, especially when I'm trying to start something new, I tend to be a little bit too aspirational. I tend to think too much in terms of what I'm trying to reach and not so much of what I can actually do on a day-to-day scale. And so it's really important to, one, be honest with yourself in this matter. For my example, I really wanted to be a morning person because I'd read so many books and heard so many interviews with especially really celebrated writers who I saw as inspirations and continue to do so. And they would say, oh, well, I get up at 5 in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, and I have my breakfast, and then I write throughout the morning, and I've succeeded at reaching my goal, which gives me the rest of the afternoon to do whatever else I need to do. And I thought, man, should I become a morning person? And for the longest time, I wasn't. I hated mornings. My brain would not wake up before about 9 o'clock. And so one time I decided, hey, I'll try it. I'll get up earlier in the mornings. And I did. But the problem was, I still wasn't awake. So those extra hours, they would only make me more tired at the end of the day. But I didn't take into account my own personal capabilities. I didn't take into account the fact that I wasn't really a morning person then. Since then, I have become one, or at least I find myself far more productive in mornings than I used to be. But that was something that took time and I had to adapt to, and I just happened to change to that. But for a very long time, I wouldn't listen to myself and my own capabilities because I saw these strategies that worked for others. I assumed they would work for me, and they just didn't. And another one that's very similar to that is one that I think we very often encounter, and these are goal-oriented schedules such as 10,000 hours to master any skill, or one of my personal favorites that I find very inspiring, but just didn't work for me exactly as written. And that was Stephen King's advice to beginner writers, which was that you should write or strive to write at least 1,000 words every day. And 1,000 words every day, it's for him, he said that works really well. It's about 3 or 4 pages double spaced. And for me, it didn't work because of the way that I tend to write. I tend to edit as I go. And so to write 1,000 words would take me far longer than if I were just to kind of set out and go in the sort of shitty verse draft style of Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, in which you're just kind of trying to put down the first draft as you go. But for me, for a very long time, that didn't work very well. And so I was getting really discouraged by this. I tried to do 1,000 words a day, and I would sit down and I would get maybe 250, sometimes 500, sometimes 750. But getting to that 1,000 was so hard for me, and it would take me so long. I was starting to think, what is wrong with me? Why am I not able to do this? And then I realized that, again, like with the morning person thing, that just wasn't my style. And so I set a goal that I figured out was reasonable for me, and that was 500 words. I do the same things with when I start new workouts, trying to work on a different muscle group, right? You start by doing a lower set of reps, a lower set of sets, a lower weight, and you begin with that, and you work your way up. It's always great to work up, but it's a lot more disheartening, I think, especially in the beginning, to work down. And so to go back to that Stephen King quote of 1,000 words a day, I think we should really emphasize, especially when we begin, that everyday part as opposed to the 1,000 words. Set a number that is actually achievable for you on a sustainable level every single time that you can capably produce. And if it's not a number, maybe it's amount of time, or maybe it's an amount of words. Well, I guess I'm still dealing with amounts, but find a way that is measurable for you and that is a sustainable quantity or amount, and whatever that might mean for the kind of plan that you're developing. But prioritize consistency. Focus not so much on that number, but on the fact that you're doing it every day or every week or every couple of days, whatever your schedule, again, allows consistently. And this brings me to the next major and most common issue when it comes to creating plans. And that is a lot of plans are not sufficiently flexible. And what I mean by that is that they don't take into account two major things. Number one, flux. Flux is one-off events or unexpected commitments. Maybe you get a call from a friend. They need to be picked up at the airport. You need to get them. Or maybe you decide to go for a longer walk one day or take a longer lunch break. Or maybe you're just having a really off day and you just feel so tired and cranky and you want to throw rotten vegetables at things. Whatever it might be. Flux is those changes from day to day that are kind of unpredictable or that you don't really account for in your schedule very explicitly. If you want to account for these sorts of things, one of the biggest suggestions that I would have is to include buffer zones. I've talked about buffer zones at length in my previous episode on the 5 steps on how to actually start any project, but the importance of buffer zones, that was more for long term, but for here, it's important to consider buffer zones even in your own days. These are times that you're kind of setting aside for just in case, and it's good to have them at incremental points throughout the day because you never know what's going to come up. Some tasks take longer than others. Sometimes you want to take a longer break, and so it's great to build in these little points of time that can be used for whatever needs to be done. And it's also good to have on a larger scale, on a week scale, on a month scale, etc. But it's good to have within each day as well. And so that's really important. The other thing that you can do in order to accommodate flux is to create alternative timelines or to think about, okay, let's say that I decide to get coffee with a friend and to catch up with them for an hour or two in a time that I normally would be studying for an exam. I say, all right, since I decided to get coffee at this time, instead, I'm going to study for this exam because I still need to do this. I'm going to maybe take a shorter walk this evening, or I'm going to maybe practice a little bit less music, but I'm going to study in the times that I would do this. Or maybe I'll take a shorter break in the evening, since I'm sort of taking one now as I get coffee with my friend. I'll take a shorter break in the evening and use that time to study for my exam. So it might still be less than I normally would on a day-to-day typical schedule that I had kind of built in for myself, but at least I'm still doing it. So I'm not falling out of the habit entirely. It's a lot tougher to sort of build back that momentum from nothing than it is from at least a little bit. The other thing that flexibility allows for is to make space for the everyday necessities that we encounter every day. And that is transitions, that is meals, commutes. I like to think of these things as the sort of autonomic system of our days, right? As you don't necessarily have to think about every time you take a breath, or every time you need to have your heart beat, or when your body goes into flight or flight mode, whatever it might be. We often forget about the kinds of things that we do every single day, or that we do consistently, such as the mental breaks that need to happen between tasks that we do. These transitions, they actually take some time. For some, it might take longer than for others, but especially, let's say you're in coursework and you're taking a lot of classes in a lot of different subjects. You might be studying things like psychology and biology and calculus and music appreciation and history all at the same time. And so when you're going through a study session and you're trying to shift from topic to topic, you're using different parts of your brain as you work with each, and you're doing different types of thinking, and it might take a little bit of time to adjust to that. Those transitions are not something we necessarily think about on a conscious level, but they're there. Or meal times, or having to go from class to class, or from home to campus, or from even just going from a task to a task. All of these kinds of things, that time builds up. And a lot of times we don't really think about it in terms of structured time. Or sometimes a meal might take longer. The other day I burned my quinoa and I had to start over, and I had to throw it out, and I still needed to eat. So I had to take some time out of doing some other task in order to make some food and eat it, and then continue on with my day. So these kinds of things, it's important to build in blocks of time for similar tasks, such as household chores. That can be a block that you can include in your schedule that is dedicated to that. Factor in transitions. You don't necessarily have to write these things out entirely in your schedule. I think it could get just way too bogged down in details if you wrote out every single thing you do. Get up at 6 o'clock, 6:02 I get out of bed, 6:05 I brush my teeth, 6:07 I take a shower, right? It gets really tedious. It's going to get too heavy. And again, it's not going to help you with being flexible, which is the goal of solving this problem. And so what you can do instead is to create these blocks of time that are dedicated to similar tasks, such as chores, such as meal preparation and consumption. That sounds so robotic. I don't like that. Eating food and enjoying your meals. Working through, a certain type of studying or reading or writing or working out. All of these types of things are specific types of tasks that you can block time off for and give yourself some room on either side, thinking in terms of the average amount of time that it takes you for each, and maybe building in a couple extra minutes on either side. That'll help to create those buffer zones that we just talked about to account for flux, and it'll ensure that you're able to stay on track within the day as you go from task to task. Once you've established that your plan is sufficiently flexible and that it accounts for things like flux, which are those day-to-day changes, and everyday necessities, which are things that you're always going to be doing, then it's really important to establish whether or not you have a clear plan. And by that, I have three kind of criteria that I like to think of in terms of clear plans. Number one, that you have established easily identifiable goals. What are you actually working towards? What's your sort of end game? Even if this is something that you hope to do for the rest of your life, a habit that you hope to endure forever, it should still have certain milestones or certain things that are going to keep you interested and engaged with this habit. So identify those goals and write them down and keep them visible for the duration of this project, or at least until your next major milestone as you work towards it. And so you might think about things like more external motivators, such as grades or deadlines. Those are very clear and identifiable goals. Or you might think in terms of things that are a little bit more abstract, such as skills that you hope to develop. In any case, it's really important to know for certain what you're working towards. Number two is that you want to have a clear plan that has measurable markers of progress. Very similarly to those easily identifiable goals, you should also be able to very clearly tell how are you making progress. You need to be able to keep track of improvement or development in some way. It doesn't necessarily have to be quantifiable, such as, oh, I can do this many reps and this many sets of bicep curls, or I can write this many words in a day, whatever it might be. It doesn't necessarily have to be a number, but it does have to be measurable in some way. And so you might want to develop a sort of system of telling whether or not you're improving. If you're learning music, you might set a list of songs from, I don't know, hot cross buns to a Bach fugue in terms of difficulty, right? Where are you in this leveling system? Maybe 50 songs as you work towards mastering the piano. Or if you're working on a new programming language that you're learning, right? Maybe you can set yourself these little tests over time based on a certain skill associated with that particular language. Whatever you do, you have to make sure that it is measurable and that it is a way that you can test yourself to see that you're actually making tangible progress. If you're not, and you're sort of just spinning in circles and staying in place, then it might be time to make some adjustments and think about, again, what those goals are. Think about how much time you're dedicating towards this thing. Maybe think about the ways in which you're developing this skill. And so from there, reset those markers of progress and keep working forward. And so, as you set these measurable markers of progress, it's also really important to give yourself rewards and consequences, which are the third and final criteria of setting a clear goal. Rewards and consequences are really important because the rewards are going to keep you motivated as you go, and the consequences, or the prospect of them, is also going to be a very strong motivator. And so, balancing these two in certain healthy and encouraging ways is very important. So, for example, every time you meet one of these measurable markers of progress, give yourself a little victory lap. Maybe take an extra long break when you find you got to a really cool discovery. Or I remember when I was writing seminar papers for my final projects and classes, I'd sometimes buy a donut or two and I would split it into sections. So every time that I finished a section of the paper, I would eat a section of the donut as a certain little symbolic victory, and the little sugar rush would keep me going for the second one, right? But having these little rewards, maybe that one isn't the most healthy example, but whatever it is that brings you a little bit of joy at a point of success or at the point of accomplishment, it's going to reinforce your desire to keep going. Equally important, however, are consequences. And depending on what that might be that you're working on, the consequences may be a little bit more external, such as if you don't hand this in by a certain deadline, then you might get a bad grade, right? Your grade might be penalized for late submission. Or in some cases, if this is something that you're doing for yourself, sometimes really one of the most brutal kind of consequences is that you aren't seeing the progress as quickly as you would like. I find that a lot of times with projects that I'm doing for myself, there is nothing more devastating than seeing I'm not making progress. And that's a really strong consequence, which kind of brings me to our next phase, which is going to be prioritizing. Because if you're working on something, especially if it's for yourself and you don't have those external motivators, you might want to consider if consistent progress and just the simple fact that you are or are not reaching those measurable markers of progress, if that's not enough of an incentive for you, then you might want to consider where this task or where this project or habit lies in your list of priorities. A lot of times, our plans fail not because of how many things we have to do, but because of how we are prioritizing them. So, in the second phase of today's episode on planning, I really want to emphasize this notion of organization and prioritization. One system of prioritization that I really enjoy using is the Eisenhower matrix or the Covey matrix. This system was developed by Stephen Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he adapted it from a quote from Eisenhower, who also adapted it from someone else. But the quote was that I have 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent. And this idea of urgency versus importance is incredibly crucial for understanding your priorities and in terms of dedicating more time and resources to the things that are ultimately going to matter most. And so Covey developed this matrix based on urgency and importance, and he broke it into 4 kinds of tasks. One is the urgent and important. These are ones in which you have deadlines and consequences. Then there are the urgent but not important tasks in which something needs to happen, but it's very low effort and pretty low impact in terms of your long-term growth. Then there are not urgent but important tasks, which are things that you're working towards for long-term goals. These are the habits that you want to develop for a sustained amount of time, right? That maybe on the day-to-day aren't so crucial, but you really want to develop this further, such as learning a language or learning an instrument. These are things that you don't necessarily need to know how to do tomorrow, but that you might want to be able to do in the future. And then finally, there are tasks that are neither urgent nor important, and these are distractions and procrastination tools. The idea behind this matrix is that you're going to emphasize, once you've established which tasks are the most important to you, that you can then dedicate more time and resources towards those while minimizing or eliminating the tasks that are the least important. And so it's great, and I think it's an excellent start, at least for taking inventory. But one adaptation that I would like to propose to this system is to schedule these tasks not only based on urgency and importance, but also in terms of energy levels. I really like to think about these kinds of things in terms of when I work best at what kind of task. I have observed over time in my own case that, for example, I write best and I do the most sustained kind of good intellectual work either early in the morning or in the early afternoon. So I know that those are my best times for the most important and most urgent work. So that's when I schedule things that have deadlines and consequences, such as papers or assignments. That's when I work on those things because I know that that's when I'm going to do them best. So I try to block off times in my schedule that I know I'm most likely to work at my best and that I am most likely to not be distracted by certain things. So for me, I know I'm least likely to be distracted in the early morning because, for example, that's when the least amount of kind of fluxy things are going to pop up. I'm not likely to get coffee with someone in the morning, most cases. I'm not likely to have to step aside. I'm not really doing meal prep. I tend to do that in the evenings. I'm not doing chores because I don't want to upset my neighbors by vacuuming at 7 in the morning. So I know that the most reliable time for me for the most important tasks is early in the morning. So that's when I do my urgent and important tasks. Then I think about the not urgent but important things, such as working out such as practicing instruments and learning languages. Those are kind of three things that I'm really invested in for the long haul, but that I don't necessarily have urgent deadlines for. So I know that I'm most likely, again, to either work out really early in the morning or immediately before dinner, because things like after meals, I'm going to get sluggish and full and I'm going to get sleepy. So I know that if I want to do this consistently, I'm going to pick these times that are maybe closer to buffery zones or closer to tasks that might get moved around a little bit, but I try to chunk them into, again, times that are the least likely or maybe second least likely to find distractions. So just before dinner, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be distracted. It's also really nice for me because after working and sitting down for a really long period during the day, it's nice to get up for me and to move around and to get some exercise in. So that really helps me. For music, I really like to play music in the evening or after dinner. Just somehow that's the most natural time for me. So that's when I schedule in those kinds of things. For things that are urgent but not necessarily important, and by this I mean important in terms of your long-term goals, these are really good to put in, especially maybe around, for me, transition periods when I'm going from task to task. I might dedicate 10-15 minutes towards just little things like organizing, like cleaning, like sending a few emails or sending a few texts, catching up with correspondence, just these little tasks that I need to do, but that aren't going to take maybe necessarily as much brain power or as much kind of focus as tasks that are much more involved and intellectually kind of intense. I like to do these in transition periods or even sometimes during my Pomodoro break periods because they're just a change of pace. They're a change of sort of thinking. They're not going to require that much effort, but they get me, in a break mode from what I've been working on. So I like to do things around transition periods and around times that I know, again, there's a lower likelihood that I'm going to be distracted, but also it's not going in those priority slots, like for my case, the early morning or before dinner or whatnot, or the early afternoon. And then finally, the tasks that are neither urgent nor important, I like to do these in break periods. I like to do these maybe when I'm winding down in the evening, or if I really have to. Again, I think it's really important to establish what really of these neither urgent nor important tasks should you actually really be thinking about. Keep those to a minimum and do them at points whenever you can. Maybe establish a buffer zone that is dedicated specifically to just miscellaneous garbage that you're going to probably have to do, but that you could go either way on it, right? The house will not burn down if you don't do this. So maybe set apart a buffer zone or a buffer day. That's a great thing that you can do in a buffer day. Are these just little tasks that build up, but that are ultimately inconsequential? So by organizing your tasks based on factors such as urgency and importance, and then balancing these factors against things like time and energy levels, you're going to really create an optimized schedule that is going to allow you to work towards your goals in the most sustainable and fulfilling ways possible. Your energy levels are going to be maintained. You're going to be happier. You're going to see consistent progress as you go forward. And then, if you can match those things by also focusing on a schedule that is more emphasizing capability or balancing capability with goals, that is flexible in order to accommodate things like flux and those everyday changes and everyday necessities, and that also is capable of providing clarity for you as you are working through any step of the process, whether that means in terms of identifiable goals or in terms of measurable progress and then rewards and consequences for which that measurable progress is going to have tangible motivators, then you're going to be working so much more efficiently, and hopefully you're going to be reaching your goals so much faster. If you have your own strategies for how to overcome the issues associated with planning, please leave a comment below and we'll have a discussion about them. It's great to see how different folks handle these kinds of things because it really is a personal process. Additionally, if you found this helpful and know someone who might benefit from some of the suggestions here, feel free to share it with them. And I'll see you all in the next week, next Monday, when we come out with another episode of Learning and Leisure. Until then, take care and good luck.